Setting up a survey style for a Trimble S-Series robotic total station in Trimble Access. From the main menu in Trimble Access, tap Settings, then tap Survey Styles. There is a pre-installed survey style that comes with Trimble Access called VX and S-Series. Tap that, then tap Instrument. The manufacturer will be set to Trimble and the model should be VX and S-Series. Under measurement mode, the default is standard. It can also be set to track. When set to standard, the instrument by default will take 5 measurements and average those together. You can change that setting here. Under Auto F1, F2, check the box for Topo point, Stakeout point, or Station Setup if you want the software to measure in Face 1 and then flop the scope and measure in Face 2 for those points. Tap 1/3. Check the box for measure distance on Face 2 if you want a distance measured when the instrument is in Face 2. By default, the box for auto lock off for offsets will be checked. So if you enter offset mode when you're taking topo shots with your total station, auto lock will automatically be turned off to prevent you from piling up offsets if you forget to change back to angles and distances. So you can uncheck that box if you don't want auto lock to be turned off when you go into offset mode, but by default it will be checked. You can set your backsite to azimuth 0 or no. I'm going to change that to 0 so that way when I do a backsite setup or a station setup and measure my backsite, it's going to automatically zero the instrument. Your servo auto turn can be set to HA only, HAVA, or off. So if you're using the servo to turn to points without elevations, you'll want it set to HA only so it won't look straight down. You can edit the instrument precisions if you wish, but the software will read whether it's a 3-second instrument, 5-second instrument if you're using a Trimble total station. So I'd leave that box unchecked. You can enter instrument centering error or backsite centering error. I usually leave this set to 0, and then we can set that in the office for our least squares adjustments. Under offset and stakeout directions on page 3, if this is set to automatic, if you're connected to the instrument via radio, the offset and stakeout directions or left, right, in, out are going to be from the pole facing the instrument or target perspective. If you're connected to the instrument via a cable or Bluetooth, it will be from the instrument perspective, so your offset and stakeout directions will be from the instrument facing the target, or you can set it for instrument perspective or target perspective. Tap Accept. Tap Topo point. By default, your measurement display is going to be set to horizontal angle, vertical angle, and slope distance. You can change this with the drop-down arrow. Auto point step size is set to 1, and view before storage is checked. This will allow you to see any data from your topo point, such as rod height and code information before you store it. If you don't want to see that, you can uncheck the box. Tap Accept. Tap Stakeout. Check the box for view before storage if you want to see your stakeout deltas and your as staked point details before you store the point. You have the option to set a horizontal tolerance. If you set, say, 500ths in here, then and your point is staked within 500ths, you won't see your as staked point details even if the box is checked. If you want to see that every time, see your as staked point details every time, leave your horizontal tolerance set to 0. You also have point stake deltas formats, line stake delta formats that you can choose. By default, they're going to be set to the default level, but you can choose different stake markups by using the drop-down arrow. Tap 1/5. Again, more stake deltas. You have your as staked name. So by default, it's set to auto point name. So if you store as staked points, it's going to give it an auto name, such as auto 0001. You can change that to whatever point number you want. You also have the choice to do the design name. So if you're staking 100, it'll store another point at 100. You could do the design name with a prefix or the design name with a suffix as well. By default, it will be set to auto point name. Tap 2/5. You can also set what your as stake code is. So if you're storing an as stake point, let's say you staked out point number 100, the code is automatically going to be that design name of the point. So if I stake out 100 but I store it at 5,000, the code would be 100. So back in the office, I know what point I was staking out. Also, you could set it to design name, design code, last code used, or station and offset there. You can check the box for store grid deltas. If you want to run a stakeout report at the end, you'll want to store the grid delta, so check that box. The display mode for the graphical display in Stakeout by default is going to be set to direction and distance. You can use the drop down menu to change that to in, out, left, right if you prefer that. Deltas are going to be in delta grid, so how close you are in the northing and easting. You could change that to distances, angle and distance, or station and offset as well. And this is for point Stakeout. If I go to 3/5, for lines and arcs, you have delta other. By default, that's going to be at station and offset, but you could set that the way you want it. So that's going to be for staking out lines, arcs, and the previous deltas would be for point Stakeout. Distance tolerance by default is set to 2 centimeters or 0.066 survey feet. This is what's going to tell you in the graphical display if the point is good or not. So if it's within 0.066, it's going to tell you to stake the point. You can set this to whatever your tolerances need to be. Same with the angle tolerance. You could load a DTM file through the Stakeout. If you do that here in the survey styles, though, the same DTM is going to load every time you go to Stakeout with a robot. You can also load DTMs, display, cut, fill, and offset the DTMs through the stake DTM routine. Uncheck the box for use compass. That way the software will use the instrument and not try to use the internal compass, which can cause problems if the internal compass on your TSC3 or whatever data collector you're using is not calibrated. By default, Stakeout will go into track mode so that it's constantly measuring you, and that way you can get your in, out, left, right information updated in real time. And by default, stake points will be removed from the list. So if you create a Stakeout list in Trimble Access, let's say you put 10 points on there, you stake out point 1, you store it as an as stake point, it will be removed from the list and you're down to 9 points. When all the points are gone from the list, you're done. You can uncheck that box if you don't want the points removed from the list. Tap Accept. Tap Duplicate Point Tolerance. In the same point name group, specify the maximum distance that a new point can be from the existing point. A duplicate point warning will appear if you try to store a new point only if the duplicate point tolerance is outside the tolerance set. So if you set 0 for these, anytime you store a point with the same name, it's going to give you a warning, and it's going to allow you to discard that point, rename it, overwrite it, store it as a checkpoint, or store and reorient if you're doing a backside check, or store another point that can be averaged later on either in the data collector or in the office software. You also have the option to check the box for auto average a point, and if you check that box, you'll be able to put in maximum horizontal and vertical residuals. So if you store a point with the same name and it falls within those maximum residuals and that box is checked, it's going to automatically average those for you. You also have F1, F2 observation tolerances. So when you carry out two-phase observations, if you're measuring rounds or doing station setups, resections, those type of things, the general survey software will check that the phase 1 and phase 2 observations to a point are within the preset tolerance here. If they're outside that tolerance, you get the option to discard the observation, rename, overwrite, store as check, or store as another. Tap 2/3. You can enter proximity check settings so that if you measure a point that has a different point name or point number, but it's within a certain distance of another point, you'll get a warning also. So if you've already measured a point and you come back and you measure it again, even though it's a different point number, if it's within this range, it will warn you that a point already exists. Tap Accept. Tap Store. Tap Escape, and tap the X at the top right hand corner.